My next guest says Trump's indictment is having a curious resemblance to the spectacle of the O.J. Simpson trial back in 1994. Delighted to welcome Senior Fellow of the United States Centre at the University of Sydney, Stephen Loosley, to the program. Stephen, great to be talking with you. There's an interesting parallel here you've drawn. I hadn't made the link, but how did you come to this conclusion?
The link becomes self-evident, Corey, when you consider the position of Alan Dershowitz, who was one of O.J. Simpson's dream team in LA during the murder trial, and as well of more recent times, one of Donald Trump's lawyers defending him during impeachment proceedings before the US Congress. And it just struck me that the two circumstances were analogous in terms of wanting to win the battle, not so much on the floor of the House or in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And Dershowitz is fascinating, former Harvard professor, a distinguished commentator and writer on American law. He maintains he voted for Hillary Clinton and he donated to Hillary Clinton's campaign. But he always believed that Trump was getting a raw deal on the impeachment proceedings. So he stepped up, just as he'd stepped up in the O.J. Simpson proceedings in 94, 95. And it just struck me that Mark Twain was absolutely right when he observed that history never repeats itself, but on occasion it does rhyme. And what we're seeing here, in any number of ways, celebrity being at the junction of American politics, law, and media, is being an extraordinary repeat of the kinds of coverage, the kinds of intense scrutiny of O.J. Simpson we're now seeing with former President Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think it plays into Donald Trump's hands. But in this case, the lawyer you mentioned, Alan Dershowitz, he's being torn apart by the left for representing Trump. Was he similarly treated this way with O.J. Simpson's trial, or was Simpson a more acceptable figure to the American left at the time?
He had his critics, Dershowitz, at the time, but the prosecution in the O.J. Simpson case attracted far more criticism once it became apparent that Detective Mark Fuhrman really needed a solid course in terms of how to treat people of colour. So the prosecution began to fall down on the basics. In terms of Dershowitz, yes, he has his critics, but he's really argued essentially for the notion of a fair trial. And I just make this point. I am no supporter of Donald Trump, quite the contrary. But I think what we need to be careful of in this kind of hysteria that's swirling around Trump at the moment, and we may see more out of it out of the state of Georgia. We may see more out of it, Special Counsel Jack Smith in Washington, D.C. The notion of the presumption of innocence rarely seems to rate a mention. And I think that's important not only in an American context, but in an Australian and a Western context. People are fundamentally innocent until proven otherwise. Now, there's a long series of steps in these Trump proceedings in New York City before we'll arrive at any kind of result. And that's why I think the presumption of innocence needs to be underlined.
Yeah, one of the things I found fascinating was when Trump was charged, Nancy Pelosi came out and said it was up to him to prove that he's innocent. Now that flips the rule of law on its head, but it suggests to me how polarised the political debate now is in America. You're seeing these huge crowds. Some people want their 15 seconds of fame by just attending, but it really does seem to be a case now of some people think Trump can do no wrong and another group of people think he can do no right. Is that a reasonable assessment?
Yes, there are some people who worship at the Trump altar still, a smaller number than in 2016. And there are many Americans who simply won't have a bar of anything to do with Donald Trump and his family. And by the way, Donald Trump has contributed to that kind of intense dislike himself with the way he's behaved on occasions over the years. Circumstances are that we're going to see the legal proceedings play out, even in New York, which is an 80-20 Democrat/Republican city in terms of the polls. I expect the courts will really work hard at making certain the proceedings are seen as fair and reasonable in every respect. But outside, in terms of media commentary, in terms of political assertions and the like, there'll be those who say there should be no charges at all, and there'll be those who are saying lock him up. And of course, you remember the Trump rallies from 2016, where people were encouraged to chant about Hillary Clinton, lock her up. So you see how these unfortunate and destructive tendencies in American politics gather strength and have appeared again in the situation of a former president of the United States.
Yeah, you made the point that Trump hasn't helped himself. I'd suggest to you that probably he thrives on the conflict and the polarisation, and he feeds it in some instances, an us against them mentality, and it's working for him. I can only see this as benefiting his quest to become the Republican nominee, whether he's found guilty here or not. How do you see that?
The immediate impact is for Donald Trump to rally his base, as we saw at Waco the other day at the rally, as we see in the amounts of money that ordinary Republican supporters are donating to the Trump campaign and to the party. I actually take on board an interview that Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire, very hard-headed Republican, but a very bright governor. He gave the interview to the program The Circus, and he talked about Republican supporters moving on beyond Donald Trump and looking at alternatives. And he made the point quite bluntly, yes, Donald Trump can win the nomination. Yes, he can win the primaries, but he can't win the general election. And even if you were up against Joe Biden again, Biden would beat him. So you have a circumstance where, in an immediate sense, Trump is able to rally the base, and there'll be the beating of the drums and so on and so forth. But the all-important centre ground represented by independent voters in the United States is less than impressed by what's going on at the moment. There are critics of the way the Manhattan DA has handled matters, but there are more critics of Donald Trump and the way he has behaved over time. So I suspect, yes, Trump can win the nomination, but it's far less likely that he can win the presidency, almost regardless of whom the Democrats put into the field.
Yeah, who needs reality television when we've got US politics to feed our quest to for all the conflict we need? Stephen Lucy, this is going to be a fascinating campaign to watch over the year ahead or so, and I look forward to talking with you about it again. Thanks for your time tonight.